Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is V and today we're gonna watch a video by Quasi about how World of Warcraft players wish the community is more like FF14. And as someone who has played a decent amount of World of Warcraft and played and still playing FF14, this is very interesting to me because over the course of streaming Final Fantasy 14, there were numerous times that I had to talk about this on stream and talk about some of my experiences, especially as a World of Warcraft player who decided to level and play something new. For years in World of Warcraft, I've been wanting to tank, and I just never really got the chance to. There were multiple instances where I wanted to try and level something, and I even remember trying to level my monk back in the day and being so bad at tanking because it was like one of my first dungeons or whatever. And at one point there was a DPS in my group that I will never forget who told me to basically step aside, that they will tank, and they had no tank spec at all, which was just, I don't know, so humiliating to me. And I felt so bad about all these things that I never actually dared tanking or healing in World of Warcraft, whereas I've already gotten to experience all of these things on multiple occasions in Final Fantasy XIV. So it's very interesting to me to hear this story and especially read these comments. I already started kind of reading a little bit. I'm assuming this is a Reddit post before I started recording this video. But yeah, we're gonna watch this together, and please make sure to subscribe to Quasi. He's an amazing content creator for Final Fantasy XIV and some other games as well. So if you're interested in that, go and watch and like and subscribe to the original video and whatnot. And if you do enjoy Final Fantasy content as well, make sure to subscribe here so you know where to come back. But without further ado, we're gonna watch the video.
So you know how the 14 community always has this debate about whether we should allow add-ons, third-party stuff like DPS meters, and whether or not we should make dungeon content way more punishing than it currently is. This is an ongoing discussion that I've seen many times in the 14 community.
I don't think that the dungeons themselves, as the normal dungeons that you go through, I don't know, within the MSQ or optional dungeons, are punishing enough. But at the same time, they have been going in the right direction with the Criterion dungeons, and I think that they're going to expand upon this. I don't think that every single dungeon mode necessarily needs to be punishing and feel punishing. I think that there has to be some sort of content for the dungeoneers who don't want to raid in a boss environment where they can thrive and also get meaningful rewards. And I'm hoping that they're going to expand on the reward system by adding actual gear and not, I don't know, materia or whatever else there is. That's the currently the reward for the Criterion dungeons. So yeah, I agree with this, but I also disagree.
And today I have a very good case study for you. The purpose of this video is not to say that 14 dungeons are better than WoW dungeons or the 14 community is better than the WoW community. No, that's not the purpose. The purpose of this video is to show you with the launch of WoW Dragonflight how some of the 14 players who are now trying World of Warcraft Dragonflight dungeons for the first time are essentially wishing that the community there and the players there are, way more friendly when it comes to new players, when it comes to tanking.
You can't really say that they didn't know about this, because literally everyone who came to play Final Fantasy XIV and who came from WoW community came with the same story about how people in FF14 are more friendly. So maybe people expected that over time the community has changed, or that the influx of Final Fantasy XIV players will somehow make the World of Warcraft community a better place after everyone goes and tries Dragonflight for some reason. But I didn't expect that to happen. I somewhat expected things to remain largely the same, with people maybe being more aware of their own behavior in dungeons, but definitely not everyone, because not every single not every single WoW player has tried FF14 as a game, or dungeons or whatever. So people have largely remained the same, in my opinion.
And basically doing new dungeon content. And all these simply goes back to the idea of the community. what is the kind of community you will foster due to how your dungeon content and how your game is set up. And I'm sure you already see the highlighted text that I shown at the start of the video, but what you have not seen is on the WoW Reddit, there's been rampant comments about how, mythic zeros, mythic dungeons are essentially already toxic. We are not even 1 week into launch and people are already complaining about how players are toxic in dungeons. If you do not know the mechanics, people are basically gonna rage on you. And as a tank, if you don't know the direction and what to pull,
You know how weird for me was in Shadowlands when I started playing? I still remember getting kicked from my first dungeon without even trying to play the dungeon because we entered the group and I was in a random group. I don't know if I was with a friend or not. I don't think I was. But I got asked if I know the mechanics, and I said no, I didn't watch the guide because spoilers, and I wanted to experience the dungeon for the first time. And even as a DPS, I got an insta kick from the dungeon because I didn't watch the guide before queuing for the dungeon, which was just blasphemous for me.
and what not to chain together as a pool, people are gonna rage on you. And it's not just an isolated incident, right? This post on the WoW Reddit, 3.3 thousand upvotes. Can some of you calm the F down in dungeons? More examples. Crazy how toxic people are in normal dungeons. I'm not even in mythic dungeons. Let's be very intellectually honest here. I believe in both games, the majority of people you meet in dungeons are actually nice people. However, I would argue the problem in both games is not the majority. It's the minority of players that will be toxic.
Because
now,
they're
the
loud.
degree of toxicity is different though because of how the game is set up, like I earlier mentioned. And it really boils down to two main things that is a very constant debate within the 14 community that I think is worth talking about in this video. But before I talk about two main factors, let me just kind of paint you a picture of what Final Fantasy players who are trying out WoW Dragonflight are currently experiencing. And I can relate to this because I mained a tank in World of Warcraft previously.
It's kind of, I don't know, like, it's kind of sad because I feel like that kind of attitude, that kind of thing, as a player will make you lose, faith in people a little bit. Because I, as a WoW player, when I started playing FF14, everybody was so welcoming to me, and it just kind of feels bad that those same people who welcomed me and welcomed us into the game 2 years ago almost, they are now, trying Dragonflight. And even though there were some, of the bigger content creators who have been raising awareness about this, knowing that people from FF14, not FF14, WoW can be a little, toxic at times. They were calling for, for peace, for, just, being very welcoming and understanding towards new players. It just kind of feels bad that someone actually has to say these things to the community, and then the community just kind of pretty much acts the same and treats other people who have just started playing the game like garbage. And those are the people who, welcomed all these WoW players in the first place. That just feels bad.
And in Final Fantasy XIV, I made a tank as well. Now, Zero McShrimp says, I wanted to make my warrior a tank, learn the basics, and look at rotation. Did some dungeons, doing my job fine, having no trouble surviving and clearing packs. Then, I get flamed on heroic dungeons for not going fast enough and doing little pulls. Meaning he pulls one pack by one pack, which honestly, to me, is very reasonable for the first week of the expansion. How do you expect the tank to know that you cannot pull group 2, 3, 4, 5 together?
Yo, people are acting like their time is the most precious time in the world. It's like all you're doing there is sitting and playing your video game. It's not like you're, the president of the United Nations who has, like, things cute that you need to, I don't know, be present for. And it's not like your time. Yes, time is valuable. Everybody's time is valuable, but these people are treating their seconds like they're, living their last day on Earth. I mean, come on.
Together because there's 6 casters in the pack. You learn by doing dungeons. And I think it's really unreasonable to expect people to learn so quickly. Anyway, he goes on to say, couple times DPS pulls more pack, expecting me to react fast and draw aggro from them like I'm their little pet. I'm already done with tanking, going back to Fury, which is a DPS spec, and I won't look back anymore. By the way, I was a main tank in 14 and I never experienced such toxicity in a short time. Someone follows up here to say, yeah, I've played WoW for years and never liked tanking for the reasons people are talking about here. The actual gameplay of tanking was fun for me until I started getting flamed if I didn't vigorously study every Mythic Plus route and perform perfectly. can totally relate to this. Tank anxiety is definitely one of the biggest topics when it comes to WoW Mythic Plus tanking. Basically,
For me, it was huge, especially when I started FF14 as a pally. I was terrified because of all the bad experiences that I had in WoW, just trying to learn how to tank. And honestly, the reason why I started tanking at FF14 is because the game was new, and I decided that I will just have everything that I do be new instead of just like jumping into some sort of familiar role as a DPS that will still feel unfamiliar because I'm new to the game and new to the class. I was like, well, this might be a good time to just start playing something new because I will still feel lost and I will still feel confused and I still haven't never tanked in my life before, and I've done DPSing, but this is not going to be the same because it's a different game. So I might as well. And honestly, I never looked back. I love tanking, and I'm just very happy that I was a part of such a welcoming community and a wave of people who were really understood as new players in 14 2 years ago.
I needed to be good at math in my head to know that I couldn't pull too much mobs, if not I'll be overcount, pull too little mobs and it's too inefficient. It's crazy expectations and balances that you have to deal with. He goes on to say, picked up Final Fantasy XIV last year on a break from World of Warcraft few months before Endwalker release and fell in love with tanking there. Tanking in Final Fantasy XIV has its own learning curve and challenges to overcome, but it's always welcome learning as opposed to flaming for not knowing, at least in my experience. The difference in community is huge. Sure, 14 has toxic people, and WoW has great people, and that is a factual statement. Like I said, there's toxicity in both communities, is the degree to which it festers.
Yes.
But it seems like the majority is the opposite in randoms. I think in 1,000 hours of 14, I've run into one person that was a dick on the level of WoW Paksa. Loving dragonflight so far, but man, I wish the community overall was a bit nicer. So we have kind of read enough to already discern what the first problem is, which is World of Warcraft dungeons and Final Fantasy XIV dungeons, they are not exactly apples to apples comparison. Again, the purpose of this video is not to say this dungeon content is better than the other. It's to bring up the point that in 14, a lot of people have been advocating.
No, this video is doing a great job at just raising awareness for both Final Fantasy XIV players and WoW players. And this is not directed at anyone, this is just the state of the things. And I don't know what it is about World of Warcraft that makes people feel the need to be so toxic, whether it's the game systems that everyone's used to, or, you know, this whole rush that people feel at the beginning of the expansion and the pressure to level and to, you know, to be a part of the content that their, you know, their guildies are doing and whatnot. It's a good video because everybody needs to just kind of touch some grass.
Like, maybe we need harder dungeon content. We need trash mobs that actually are difficult. For example, this trash mob will do A, B, C, D, E ability, and you need to play around the ability. You need to know the mechanics here. You need to know that you need to stun this cast and you need to interrupt this cast, and it's on a 2-person interrupt rotation and things like that, which is what World of Warcraft expects people to do in their dungeons. And this discussion was definitely brought up again when they launched Variant and Criterion dungeons of Final Fantasy XIV. And sure, Criterion dungeons and the Savage equivalent definitely had very difficult trash mobs that hit very hard, but the level of complexity is definitely not like World of Warcraft. So taking a step back here, right, 14 dungeons in a nutshell is very heavily integrated into the storytelling and the MSQs. Very heavily integrated. Can you imagine you got to the final dungeon of Endwalker and you spend hours and hours wiping there because on the first week of launch, people didn't know what the trash mobs did. And they didn't know that, well, this guy does like a frontal.
The game is just different. The game focuses a lot more on the lore aspect, and that's a fact. And I think that it would be okay if there was like a harder version of these dungeons for people to, to just challenge themselves a little bit. But I think the game is also trying to provide a seamless experience when you're experiencing the lore because of the whole story that would feel interrupted if you had to just sit there and wipe for hours, like Quasi said. And I think for Final Fantasy XIV, that is overall a good decision and a good direction. Whereas in World of Warcraft, even though, yes, some of the dungeons are lore heavy, they're not really, from my experience, that big of a deal unless some of those dungeons were as big and iconic as, I don't know, the Culling of Stratholme or whatever. But not every dungeon is a freaking Culling of Stratholme when it comes to the lore, and that's just a fact.
this guy does like a chariot AoE, and there's all these things that the beginners have to figure out. Then suddenly the entire story experience will be soured, because I think 14's approach is always storytelling first. That has always been the key selling point of Final Fantasy XIV. The MSQs. So that is sacred and that cannot be basically ruined. And because dungeon content in general is so tied to the story, I feel like if they ever go down the path of World of Warcraft and require the tank to know all these complex math problems and routes to take, then you have exactly what you see on screen. Like in groups, people will get frustrated with you as a tank because you don't know where the hell you're going, or don't know what the hell you're doing, because all they want to do is just get to the end of the story and you are the one impeding them. And this is precisely a very good case study of how the grass might always seem greener on the other side, while it's easy for us to make demands like we want harder trash mobs, we want way harder dungeons. This is the trade-off that you experience, which is some of the toxicity that you will face in group content. Now, is there room for more difficult dungeon content in Final Fantasy XIV in the future? I actually think so. I think Variant and Criterion Dungeon was their first step to testing difficult dungeon content, and they didn't want to go too crazy with it, but you can definitely sense.
I don't think they should have gone crazy. I think they should have just made the rewards feel more relevant. Not even the cosmetic awards, like the mount from the Criterion Dungeons is enticing. I personally haven't done them because I didn't see the purpose in it. I mean, yes, it probably would have been good for, for content and whatnot, but there's no gear, and I think that dungeons that are on the Savage difficulty should reward gear, because Savage raids do reward gear as well, and I think it should have been implemented here as well. And the mount, which is normally something that I as a collectionist would be kind of enticed by, it's just not appealing to me, and I think they should have made the rewards a little cooler, in my opinion.
Criterion Savage, dungeons, the mobs, the trash mobs before the boss, they actually truck. Pulling wall to wall is impossible. And they have now started doing stuff like untelegraphed AoE and frontals in the Savage mode. And I do think 14 is kind of pushing the boundaries on that, but they couldn't go too fast either, because if you go too fast and implement all these difficult content, again, you end up with what you see on screen here. Potential frustration for the player base, because it fosters this kind of pressure on tanks or on players to understand exactly what they're doing in the dungeon. If not, the content is just not doable and the group falls apart. So that's the first discussion point that I wanted to raise in this video. This debate about more difficult content in dungeons for Final Fantasy XIV. Again, I'm not saying that we don't want difficult content in 14. I'm just saying that if they go overboard with it, you basically get the backlash that you see on screen. And now let's move to the second point I'd like to bring up. Another Final Fantasy XIV player who tried out Dragonflight said, my opinion is it's mostly mods and some other things. DPS meters being widely and openly available to a user base referring to WoW, without the wisdom or desire to use them properly, is a huge problem. 14 has damage meters, but
honestly, I know this is like probably a hot take for anyone playing not FF14 WoW, but I think that the dungeon meters shouldn't even be loadable in very low end content. I feel like those dungeon meters should only be relevant in the content where that actually matters. Like, I don't know, Mythic Plus, or maybe, I don't know, heroic dungeons, or not heroic dungeons, heroic raids. I think that's something that is important to realize, that people use these dungeon meters out in the open world. They will be fighting a world boss and will be trashing people based on their performance out in the wilds, which is just blasphemous. I think that if you're gonna use the damage meter, it should just not work in the like party finder for the raids, or in normal dungeons or whatever, because it makes no sense. It has no point.
You're forbidden to mention them in the game in any way, so they're used for self-satisfaction purpose only. And to a certain degree, he is kind of right. In World of Warcraft, it's so easy to point out where the dungeon went wrong. Like, for example, if you fail to meet a DPS check and the boss enrages, it's very easy to just glance and say, hey, Hunter, you're doing 10% the damage of everyone else. It's also easy to look at a healer and say, hey, healer, the tank is out healing you, what's going on here? You can even filter down to the level of, hey, Hunter, you did 0 interrupts while the Demon Hunter did 10 interrupts. And because you miss an interrupt here, we wipe. It's easy to get data like that, and for the longest time, players have been leveraging on the data to basically troubleshoot what the problem is. However, the downside to this, widely enabling third-party add-ons, which is a very hot topic in 14, the downside to enabling the widespread usage of, external add-ons and tools is this. which is basically you hand people the ammunition to be toxic, to say, you're such a bad player, you're only doing 20% or 30% of your potential output or something like that. I'm just bringing up the point that one of the biggest, counter arguments to allowing third-party add-ons and mods in 14 is that we don't want to foster an environment where DPS meters and add-ons for raiding and dungeons is the norm. Because once you have the expectation built in within the community, if you are new, you don't know your rotation, you underperform, or for some reason you don't know the add-ons, you don't know north, south, east, west, where to stand in the safe spot, you naturally get flamed upon because the expectation is really seeded within the community, which is basically what you see on screen here. So just to reiterate again, this video is not about 14 dungeons or WoW dungeons are better. They are not the same.
I think he did a good job at just like making sure that no one is feeling attacked, but at the same time, this video is purely, out of context, taking a fact and just putting it in front of people and just making sure that people are, aware of it and hopefully more chill about what they're doing, because it's really not worth it. It's not some high-end content that they're talking about here. There's not even like mythic plus. There's mythic 0, which in 2 weeks will become pretty much obsolete when it comes to the difficulty of the gameplay. So in general, people just need to chill.
It's apples and oranges, you can't compare them. They are built differently. There's a trade-off to asking for more difficult dungeon content in 14, especially if it's tied to the story, especially if it's tied to content that the majority of the player base is currently enjoying. And number 2, there is a trade-off to asking for like DPS meters or these external third-party add-ons that allows you to monitor players' performances in PvE or maybe even PvP settings in 14. There's a trade-off. You might not see it in 1 week or 2 weeks, but you will see it in the long run due to how the community builds in certain expectations of new players.
Basically, this video is a be careful what you wish for kind of thing, and I agree.
And I really don't know if you want to foster an environment like what these people are basically highlighting on screen. I just thought it's a very interesting topic because with the launch of WoW Dragonflight, I know a lot of 14 players are checking it out, and it's also a good reminder of what we currently have in 14 and what the potential reality is like, and maybe the grass is not always greener on the other side. So that's basically my quick 2 cents on the issue. If you enjoyed my take, do subscribe to the channel, join our happy family, that would mean the world to me. I stream on Twitch, feel free to swing by to hang out. Last but not least, a big shout out to my Patreon subscribers for keeping the channels alive. Have a great day, folks. I will see you soon. So you know how the
This was a very good video. Again, thanks to Quasi for putting it out there and for letting people just kind of take it in as food for thought. And it was very good, very insightful. And even though there wasn't like a lot of new information, there's pretty much nothing in this video that we all don't already know. It is an issue that if you're playing World of Warcraft, you have to like be constantly aware of. And if you're playing FF14 and you're craving this harder difficulty content, I agree with Quasi when he says that this kind of content will bring in pressure and will bring in people who want to be super competitive at it, and this is just something that gets awoken in people as a consequence. So it is something to think about. But I overall enjoyed the video, and it made me more aware of some things for both Final Fantasy 14 and WoW. What do you think? Do you play FF14? Do you play WoW? What is your experience, and how do you compare the two? Make sure to let me know in the comments. Thanks again to Quasi. Make sure to go and subscribe over there as well. Sub here if you like FF14 and easy to use content that you can watch and take advantage of in game straight away. And yeah, on that note, I will be seeing you in my next video. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!